when are we going to send our first, fighting men into space? When's there going to be space infantry? Like, can you imagine, like, you know, raking and cleaning the moon with your PT belt on? like, like, that's where it's really headed. My recruiter lied to me.
Welcome, everyone, to the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club, a small nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, PA. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Our program, the Scuttlebutt, was created to highlight the educational element of our mission by discussing recent military headlines and topics to help bridge the military-civilian divide. We're so excited to have you with us again for another episode. If you'd be so kind, we ask that you spread the Scuttlebutt by liking, sharing, subscribing. Make sure you ring the bell on YouTube. That way you are the first to be notified whenever our new episodes are released every Monday. And also leave a comment on YouTube or send me an email at sean@veteransbreakfastclub.com. We always like to hear from you, and we can always talk about that on the Scuttlebutt as well. Joining me today are three veterans. We're going to go around the room. Ryan, we know you. You've been with the Scuttlebutt multiple times here, but I'll start with you, and then we'll move on to Lee and Eric. I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about the Vet Center. So, Ryan, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan All. I am an Army veteran. I deployed to Iraq in 2004, 2005, and again in 2009. And I've been working with the Vet Center for about 5 years now.
Great. Thanks. Lee?
Hi, Lee Wagner. I've been with the Vet Center for 3.5 years. I did 8 years in the Marine Corps. I was in Iraq in 2003 as part of the initial invasion, and I got out of the Marine Corps not too long after that.
Great. Eric?
Name's Eric Lundblom. I've been with the Vet Center almost 15 years now. Started out in the United States Marine Corps 4 years, and then got out, joined the Army National Guard in Florida, and got mobilized after 9/11 and did the initial invasion in Iraq. Came back home in 2004 and got out shortly afterwards.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, guys. And thank you all for joining me today for this conversation. We're going to dive straight into our segments here. First up is going to be our Where in the World is the U.S. military. We've been doing this for a couple weeks. I'm going to share this map. We've been looking at it for about 2 weeks now. We started off in Germany. We talked a bit about Tunisia last week. This comes to us from the Smithsonian. This is the U.S. counterterrorism activity in 2017, 2018. But we thought we'd bounce around this map a bit week to week and just sort of talk about what the U.S.'s involvement in the world has been. In our first episode, Karen Sudkamp made a comment that when 9/11 happened, you wouldn't have thought 20 years later that this is the level of involvement the U.S. probably would be in. But here we are. And I think it's important for our audience, those of you who definitely have very little or no experience with the military, to kind of take a look at this and learn a bit about what we're doing in individual countries that involves counterterrorism. But today, I thought we would highlight Yemen, and that's because of an article I came across from defensenews.com stating that the U.S. Is going to end its support for the Saudi Arabia side in the war in Yemen. A bit of history here. It would take us the whole program to talk about this war, but since 2015, the Arab Sunni nations of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have led a coalition of states in Yemen against the rebel Houthi forces, which are backed by the Shia government of Iran. Now, the Houthi forces in September 2014, they took over Yemen's capital, Sana'a. And this has been a 6-year war in Yemen that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. The United Nations calls this the world's worst humanitarian disaster. The U.S. has provided billions of dollars of arms to the Saudi-led coalition fighting against the Iran-backed rebels. But on February 5th, Defense News reported that the U.S. has ended its support of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. The U.S. remains committed to helping Saudi Arabia defend its territory against attacks by the rebels. And the United States also made the move to delist Yemen's Houthi rebels as a terrorist organization. This removes a block that humanitarian groups said jeopardized crucial aid as the country's warring sides cautiously pushed for peace. A spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said in a statement, the revocation of the designations will provide profound relief to millions of Yemenis who rely on humanitarian assistance and commercial imports to meet their basic survival needs. Like I said, this is a very complicated area, a very complicated war. There's a wonderful article by brookings.edu about the brief history of the America's sort of troubled relationship with Yemen that we're going to post in our description. And also there's a great YouTube video that details sort of the war and the warring sides in this war. I encourage you to take a look at that, read that article. That'll give you more information about the background and more information about the US's involvement in Yemen. And that, my friends, is the straight poop, so to speak. You don't know what the straight poop is, and I don't think this is a military term. Am I right?
Sounds like a Navy thing to me. I mean,
I'm going to say Navy
weird
term.
things that happen in the Navy. Nobody really fully understands it.
Right. They got a poop deck, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's 2 Marines here. They were technically in the Department of the Navy.
Technically. Did you guys ever hear the straight poop?
I've
No
never-
drill sergeant.
I don't think I heard that term before.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So this being a first for the Scuttlebutt, this will not be a military term of the week. This is a civilian term of the week, supposedly, unless it's Navy. And maybe somebody who's listening can email me about this, but I heard it from a veteran, the straight poop. And not that you need a definition, but poop is used primarily to refer to inside information and not only in a financial context. The term might be used in a sentence such as, she gave me all the poop in the office party, or is that the straight poop? Poop is often a piece of gossip or anecdotal information that can be used to give a traitor an edge. Traitor as in not traitor, traitor. But straight poop. Try to say it without smiling.
Oh,
Learn something new.
I'm gonna put that tool in my toolbox. And, just
For your
carry it around.
For your
I don't-
kids, right?
Yeah.
Go to bed. That's the straight poop.
Yeah. I mean, as a parent, you just deal with so much poop that, it can work its way into your everyday, lexicon.
And you can work it into your fingernails, as much poop as you have to deal with dealing with kids. I totally hear you on that.
Yeah.
So jumping into our headlines this week, I wanted to highlight, because last week we had a great conversation about the military-civilian divide. And it was something that caught my eye was on militarytimes.com, that an op-ed by Major Mitch Forge, I believe is his call sign, Fossum. He is an Air Force fellow in the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This article just came out the other day. It's an op-ed. He's also an F-15E fighter pilot, Little League coach, and neighbor, as it says. And the views expressed are those of just the author, and they do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. It states that at the end of the article. But I thought it was a very intriguing article talking about what he called the civ-mil relationship, and that it's local, that a lot of headlines talk about this divide being blown up to a national perspective, but really we have to deal with it on a local level between military and civilians. It also dives a little bit more into civilian employers of the military. Lee, Eric, coming onto the Scuttlebutt, I figured we'd chat a bit about this military-civilian divide. How do you perceive it? And do you think that there's ways that we can work on that?
I read the article yesterday. I could tell it was written by an officer before I finished it. Just a lot of big words, but I appreciate his opinion on the matter. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I mean that's here nor there. I mean, in general, I feel that I agree. Like it can't be local. It's a cultural issue. I think I don't. If Eric remember, you guys remember this. I mean, like it was pretty clear when we went to Iraq in 2003, there were higher ups in the administration like, you go to the mall, we'll go to war. And that divide, which has always been there to some degree, has just grown wider over these past couple decades for many reasons. And I think it's hard to pinpoint it on any one particular thing. And I'm not a big fan of pointing fingers and saying this person or that group of people should do more things differently. I think it's more of a community, a culture issue that can be worked on. But the one part I will agree upon it has to be local. It has to be within our individual communities. And for me personally, I have a lot of friends who are civilians. I have a lot of friends who are veterans, and the civilians are always respectful, ask questions, and try to understand, what a day in the life is like. And sometimes they just don't know what they don't know, and and we as veterans have a responsibility to be like, well, here's what it's like, or talk with a young person who's thinking about going in the military, so we can kind of bridge that gap, both of parties working to kind of bridge that divide. That's kind of what I took away from it reading it last night.
Do you think it's a negative for someone to not know what they don't know? Do you think it's innocent? Do you think it's their responsibility to then seek out what they don't know?
Yeah, I think there's some personal accountability. I think that's where the cultural aspect comes into. I think I'm not going to fault someone if they don't know, but I think it's also important that these are tax funded things. We joined the military, we volunteered, we get paid a paycheck that's paid by taxpayers' dollars. I think anyone who is part of this community and country and pays taxes should have an understanding of what's going on. They don't have to be as in depth as some people, but they should at least know what they're asking, or have an idea of what they're asking people to do. I think there is a piece of personal accountability to it. Yeah, good question.
Interesting. And part of what he said in the article it brought up was that whenever somebody transitions back to a serviceman or woman transitions back to civilian life, they should somehow take that urge, that desire to serve their country, and they should bring that into their communities, and they should serve on school boards, and they should coach little league, and that way they help to integrate into a community, and also in that way teach and lead, because as a serviceman or woman, you're one of the biggest things you learn in the military, my understanding is that you learn to lead, and then it also puts the onus on the community to say, we're going to hire veterans to be a part of that, even if right now veterans coming out of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq are young and they might be moving around a lot. Integrate them as much as you can, because it's part of the civilian responsibility to do that. My question came to, and maybe you guys can help me with this, is have you felt that the desire to serve your country also transitioned with you out of the military into civilian life?
Well, I think we're biased because we all work for the VA and we work for vets, right? But if you look in terms of integrating into society, I don't necessarily, I've coached soccer, I've, neighborly with my neighbors and do things and help out, but that's by my individual choice. And I think the author makes an assumption that veterans maybe aren't doing this when they are. It's part of the readjustment and reintegration. I think I have issue with maybe the tone of the article, as Lee did as well, in terms of that maybe we're owed something, or they should be more accepting of us. I have a hard time mandating people to choose to accept me for service, because it is a free country, and you have free decision making and everything. And I think it goes back. Lee made a good point in terms of, we're an outcome of taxpayer money, and so they should pay attention to us. But in general, people go about their lives and don't pay attention to a lot of those things. What do we know about rocket science and NASA operations? What do we know about national park operations? You could go down a rabbit hole basically with what you know versus what you don't know, and you're always going to know a lot less than everything. So it's kind of a interesting question. I think the whole dynamic with it is the course of service and the disconnect between civilians and military. I look at it as something as simple as, I think, the development of technology, in terms of we don't need as many service members to do things. look at a B-17 bomber in World War II that had a crew of, I don't have it in front of me, but maybe 8 people to bomb a target.
Mhm.
You only need one guy flying a plane then, or in a Connex box somewhere flying a drone to hit the same target that it would maybe take 10 B-17s to do. So technology is a great thing, but I think it's impacted the way society sees the military, because we don't need as many military people anymore to do war fighting or to serve as we once did.
Mhm. It's a really interesting take, and I love hearing the veteran viewpoint on his op-ed too, because me reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, like maybe like that makes sense to me. Ryan, did you have a chance to take a look?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing that I really took issue with, I think that the premise of his argument is good. Like, could this help fix military civilian relationships? Yes. I think putting the onus on the service member to get more engaged in their community is a little bit of a slippery slope there, right? We already ask our service members to do so much, and their job, their time while they're there is to do their job, and then to put it upon them to then go out and engage and do these things. Like, yeah, sure, it's possible, but in a lot of ways it may not be, depending on that person's workload. Like, they have a lot going on, and they are there for a very short time, and it's very transient. Like, you can barely get to know a community in 1 to 2 years, let alone have meaningful engagement in that community. So I think that's a bit of a tall ask for a lot of service members when they're moving from place to place. That's a bit tough, I think.
That was kind of my feeling on it as well. The idea of, okay, I've just transitioned out of the military. I just kind of want to like take a step back and live maybe a normal life or a regular life for a bit. And I don't really feel like going out and educating just yet. And how much are we imposing or expecting that, oh, you need to come in and you need to help us fix this divide, help us understand what you've been through. And maybe you just want to like take a step back, take a break, not tell the stories just yet. We've run into this a lot with Veterans Breakfast Club, I think, where we're at a point where I think a lot of the Vietnam veterans are they're like ready to talk about their service, and not that that's easy. But in the wars that we've been in for the last 20 years, many people may not be ready to come back and just start discussing what their experiences are, or teaching us about what a day in the life in the military is.
I actually had a question I wanted to pose to Eric and Lee and see what their thoughts were on this. Like, every now and then, right? Like, your post-service identity doesn't always have to revolve around your status as a veteran, right? And I think that kind of gets overlooked. And I wanted to see, what Lee and Eric thought about that. Like, not every veteran who comes out wants to jump into the veteran space, or that is no longer, that may not be a part of their identity. And I think a lot of people and civilians assume that is a big part of who they are. They're a veteran first and all these other things afterwards. And, we run into other guys who that's not the case at all.
No, I mean, I've met people over my time working for the Vet Center and the VA, outreaching to them saying, hey, we have this or this. And they've said, oh, that's great, but I'm going to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
That experience was that experience, and they're ready for new experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have an enjoyable time in the service for whatever reason, so they want to disconnect from it.
And you can't blame them for that, right?
No, they're not doing anything wrong.
Right. Lee?
Yeah, I'll agree. I was that person that didn't really identify that much as a veteran. I mean, everybody knew I had served, but I worked in the corporate world from when I got out, end of 2003, and then had a corporate career essentially from 2006 to 2015, give or take. So, yeah, being a veteran was part of who I was, but it wasn't. I wasn't. What's the word I'm looking for? Excuse me. Walking around, as I am today. It's a big part when we do
Beating the
outreach.
drum in a sense.
Yeah, it's a big part of who we are and how we get men and women to engage with the vet center and the VA by sharing our stories of service and whatnot.
Mhm.
But so for me, there was a lot of things going into identity and who, lots of stuff, and it's very individual. And as Eric mentioned, not everyone really enjoyed their time. And you figure you enlist, say, the three of us enlisted at a young age, as I know we all did. You're 18, 19, 20 years old. Yeah, rarely do people that age know exactly who they are as a person and what they want. So they like, instead of, when they feel a duty or to serve their community and country, so they go join the military. And, fast forward 8 years later, maybe a couple combat deployments, you still might not have completely understood who you are as a person, and that you need time to identify that. And personally for me, it's, I've kind of come full circle over the past handful of years of who I was before and who I was now, who I am now, and who I was when I was in. And you kind of learn that that's just a part of life and who you are. And so it's to their point, it's, to come walking out that door, take that uniform off and be like, all right, start serving again. That's a big ask.
It's a great point. I want to come back to that. You made a good point about at the vet center, you could connect with veterans through telling the stories. Definitely want to come back to that. I want to jump to our next headline, and we will come back to this military civilian divide. I'm hoping to have Mitch Fossum join us to discuss his op-ed. The next article comes to us from military.com, where no U.S. troops have died in combat in Afghanistan for a year as of last Monday, February 8th. This comes after Army Sergeants First Class Javier Gutierrez and Antonio Rodriguez were the last Americans to die in battle in Afghanistan on February 8th, 2020. The U.S. troop numbers in Afghanistan were slashed from 13,000 a year ago to 2,500, and roughly 2,300 American service members have died in combat in Afghanistan since the war began in October 2001. I should note that the Taliban, that we are in peace talks. There's some peace talks happening there. Taliban has come out and said, if you're not fully out of the country, we will continue to target American troops. So this war continues on, and it's something that we touch on in our other program for VBC, Generation 9/11, which I host on Thursday nights. Consider this an open invitation, Lee, Eric, Ryan, to come onto that program. Everything that we usually discuss on the Scuttlebutt can, I think, easily mirror into that program, and we can talk more in depth about your service and your thoughts on the last 20 years of conflict. And we hope that the audience members here today would join us over on that program to hear more about the service of our servicemen and women. Let's get to our main story, though. And this involves all three of your jobs at the vet center. In fiscal year 2019, 307,737 veterans, active duty service members, including Guard and reservists, and their families received readjustment counseling at VA's 300 vet centers, totaling nearly 1.9 million visits and outreach contacts. A quote that I read was, "We are the people in the VA who welcome home with honor the war veteran for providing quality readjustment services in a caring manner, assisting them and their family members toward a successful post-war adjustment in or near their respective communities." We had talked a bit about the VA last week. We decided to focus in more on the vet center. But I want to go really back to basics here and just understand what the vet center is. And I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on sort of the history of the vet center, how it came about, and what it does.
The vet center is a community-based outpatient clinic. We are VA employees. We are part of the VA, but we're not really part of the healthcare system per se. The entire point of the vet center is to reduce barriers as much as possible to getting help and treatment for our war zone veterans. So they can come home, they can see someone in their community who is probably a veteran. Most vet centers are staffed mostly by veterans themselves. And the idea is to get that help that you need. There's no cost to vet center services, and a veteran can come to a vet center for as long as they want. and I don't want to give away all the stuff, so I'll just like, you can edit me out there and we'll pass it along to somebody else. I'm sure they all have things to say too. I don't need to give the whole commercial by myself.
So if you want to go into history, the program was established in 1979,
Mhm.
and it was supposed to be a temporary program in order to assist Vietnam veterans that were having difficulties reintegrating and readjusting back from the war. It got extended indefinitely and expanded eligibility in 91 when the Gulf War started, and then they've added other combat operations ever since. So like I said, it was a 2-year program originally, and this is based on history that was kind of passed on to me. And I think some of it's out there on the web. You can find a more detailed history, but it was established and they hired Vietnam veterans mainly that were good at talking with people. The clinical backgrounds were a lot looser back in the day compared to now. And the program's adapted over time. I've been with the Vet Center, like I said, almost 15 years. When I got hired on, I was in Ryan and Lee's position as outreach worker. And my job was specifically to go out and find returning Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and get them engaged in Vet Center services, get them enrolled in the VA for healthcare and assist them in their transitions. The program's expanded greatly in those years. I think when I joined, it was 207 vet centers, and we're over 300 now with the additional mobile vet centers as well. So it's adapted to the needs of our returning service members and our other service members and veterans that have fought in previous wars.
Lee, I'll go to you. Why did you decide to join the Vet Center?
Well, I think before I jump into that, I'll add, one component that I greatly appreciate of the Vet Center is its focus on working with military sexual trauma survivors. So, in addition to working with, men and women who served in combat zones, of all generations, this is a component of the VA that does work with a lot of military sexual trauma survivors. So that's that's somewhat newer, as Eric mentioned. Different services have been added through the decades. That's one of them that's been added, and it's definitely a need in the community. So how I got into it was, I was friends with Brian, who worked at local universities, and I was referring veterans to Eric's services from my position at the local university. I knew Ryan. And I remember Ryan messaged me, he said, I'm leaving where he was at to go to the Vet Center. I was just curious. And just over time, this next year or so, I forget how long it was, I just learned more about the opportunity. And, as Eric mentioned, he transitioned to a counseling role and, finishes licensure. And for me, it's I kind of enjoy the outreach aspect. I have a business background, so I approach the outreach work I do. I'm very, not analytical, but, kind of a more of a sales-minded approach. It sounds bad, but it works really well. It's just a matter of getting in front of as many veterans as possible, and actually getting in front of as many community members as possible. Working for the Vet Center, I use the phrase of, I'm trying to find a needle in a stack of needles. There's a lot of veterans in Western Pennsylvania, and not all of them are eligible, or not all of them require our Vet Center services. So the more I can get in front of and talk about and help get into the VA for enrollment, the better likelihood we'll have those men and women who want to work with us, they need to work with us, and their families. And so long story short, it's I never knew what the Vet Center was. I received kind of readjustment counseling through a psychology clinic at a local university. I never knew what a Vet Center was. I had one tour of combat. I have many friends who have multiple tours of combat, and I didn't know what a Vet Center was till 2015, 12 years after I got out. So I think that's a big part of what pushes me, is that men and women need to know about our services and know we're here.
Do you think that if you would have known about the Vet Centers, you would have chosen that over the clinic?
I had multiple opportunities to go other places between 2003 and 2015. I don't think it really mattered the place. It was more, when was I ready? And when I was ready, the place I went to was literally at my doorstep and presented to me in that manner. And it was a great benefit to my life, and that's why I'm a proponent of readjustment counseling, and will be for the rest of my life. But it's hard to say. It's walking away from the military. I was one of those people who was proud to be a veteran and proud I served, but I didn't want to hang around with a lot of veterans for a little while. So I'm not sure if I would have walked into a vet center or not, but I'd have liked to know about it for sure.
Eric, why you have a long history with the vet center. What made you decide to become a readjustment counselor there?
I had came back from Iraq, and like many veterans, wanted to party and have a good time. And there was a VFW down the road from where I lived at in Florida. And I got active in the VFW while I was there. And to this day, I don't know who it was, but one of their members utilized the Tallahassee, Florida Vet Center. And the counselors at the vet center had asked the client, hey, do you know any Iraq, Afghanistan veterans? We're looking to hire one for an outreach position. And he gave them my name and information. And they actually reached out to the VFW to get a hold of me and said, hey, we're part of the VA and we heard good things about you. We'd like to interview you for a job. And I was in college. I just started at Florida State University, and I wanted to go to school, but I also knew turning down a federal job at the time with good benefits was kind of dumb. So I actually went in for the interview, and I said, I have some hesitations if I get offered this job because I want to go to school. And they said, no, we want you to go to school. And so they hired me, and I was encouraged to go to school, and my boss let me be flexible in my schedule. And I started out in Ryan and Lee's position as a outreach worker for several years and covered parts of the Florida Panhandle and South Georgia and South Alabama. And then after several years working there, I figured the next step was to become a counselor, because the vet center is pretty unique. It's like the military. You have senior leadership and junior leadership, and you knew the senior leadership was going to retire. And when you buy into the program, I think you worry about the legacy of it. So I think I bought in at some point and said, well, I want to be that counselor, that veteran counselor, to take over for the veterans that I'm working with, which my whole staff I worked with at the Tallahassee, Florida Vet Center was all Vietnam vets, and they're all retired now. Our vet center here in Pittsburgh, I was the first Iraq, Afghanistan veteran, I believe, hired here. And the rest of the staff, two of the counselors were Vietnam vets. They're both retired. Now our whole staff here is post 9/11.
That's awesome. Ryan, what brought you to the vet center?
Eric, mostly.
All of Ryan's success is owed to me, basically.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. No, I was working at a local university, like Lee stated, and it was a great job. I really enjoyed. I worked with veterans at the university. It was a great position. I enjoyed working there. Eric reached out to me and with the opportunity and said, hey, would you be interested in this position? We're hiring for it. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. It was a little bit of a change from what I was doing, and I was looking for a change, and I was going to be a new father, and was looking for some different opportunities and some more flexibility in my work time and things like that. As an outreach worker, sometimes we work evenings or weekends or whatever, but typically we can be pretty flexible with when we're on the clock, and that was appealing to me. And the vet centers are small teams, and in the military and in the civilian, I always liked working in small teams. It seems to be more flexible, and like you can achieve objectives a little easier because you have less considerations, right? And I think that's one point that I'd also like to bring about the vet centers is that there's 300 vet centers across the country, all in their communities, and we are all given the freedom to do what is necessary to meet the needs of our community. We have very little bureaucracy to work through If we want to try something new, a new event or a new type of group or whatever, we are allowed to do it. The only person's approval we need is the director of that vet center, and we can typically try something new. So every vet center does something different. Our vet center, even though it's just a few miles on the other side of town from where Lee works at, we offer completely different services because our populations that we serve are slightly different. So we offer all of the same basic readjustment counseling services, but as far as outreach groups or different types of things, we are allowed to do those different things, which I think is a huge benefit of the vet center program.
Now, it seems to like it sounds like a vet would come to the vet center. It's great that the vet center seems to do sort of what would you call cultural competency, having a vet meet a vet so that there's a shared language immediately. There's no barrier right off the hop. But what sort of qualifications do you need to sit down with a vet and talk with them about the issues that they're facing?
Well, from a clinical background, what the requirements are is you need to have either a master's degree in social work or professional counseling, psychology degree, et cetera, and then whatever licensure requirements. But at the same time, the outreach workers here, and including myself when I was outreach worker, I didn't have a degree. It was just going to engage the vet and talk to them and let them know about the services. So we all have some type of interaction with our veterans, and just depending on how deep we want to get into that interaction will be the foundation for that degree and licensure requirements, et cetera.
Do you have to be a veteran to be a counselor?
No. Staff here is all veterans. Lee, I believe your staff has a few non-veteran counselors, correct?
Two. Yeah, two.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And now, correct me, because we've talked a bit about the vet center and dealing with veterans who are dealing with PTSD on that program. And I wanted to ask in that program, but I figured I'd wait till here on the Scuttlebutt, is an update on PTSD. Are we still calling it PTSD or is it PTS? I seem confused on that, so I wanted to clear that up.
PTSD is the correct clinical term based on the DSM manual that mental health providers use for diagnosis and assessments. PTS is more of the, how would you describe it? Maybe the trendy marketing way, right? No one wants to say they have a disorder. Mm-hmm. As a clinician, I'm kind of ingrained to say the PTSD, but you will see a lot of things out in the media, and if you see stories about it, sometimes it's called PTS, and I don't have an issue with it at all. It's just one of those things ingrained in me from my background, and it's changed over the course of while I've worked here. But either term works.
Okay.
Is it fair? Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to talk over you. I wanted to ask just a quick question because I think the listeners might be curious. Is it fair to say a person could have post-traumatic stress, but then not develop post-traumatic stress disorder? Or are we really, with those two terms, talking about two different things?
It's above my pay grade.
Okay, I didn't know if that was like
to answer that one. So
cut all that out.
Well, I'll chime in as I remember the first time a psychologist said, we had a conversation around PTSD, and he's like, I'll kind of paraphrase. It's like, well, you have it, but I'm not, but that's what it is. To Eric's point, this is a diagnosis from a manual that licensed behavioral health, mental health professionals use. I think our culture, we go back to what we started earlier, they like to attach things. They like to keep things simple. Mm-hmm. This happened, so somebody has PTSD, and that PTSD means they have all these things. So I think we've done a good job, the mental health professionals, saying, yeah, that's the PTSD is what we use. But Ryan's question, you can have post-traumatic. I mean, you don't have to, doesn't have to mean, it's not that black and white. So it's a good question, a good conversation to have, because, from there came post-traumatic growth and the books about post-traumatic growth. And, it's a little bit of a, I've been mentioning that call yesterday. It's a little bit of a tagline, but it's not nothing that Eric hasn't helped, dozens, if not hundreds of veterans through in the course of him doing his work as a counselor. So it's just another way of calling it something. And so, yeah, they get clinically specific. It is PTSD, but, we never want people to attach themselves to a disorder or something, because then that can lead to they feel broken or whatnot, and stereotypes and stigma. And I think Ryan mentioned before, like, we're in our communities to help break that stigma and help people get connected to services that they might need.
And that sort of maybe goes along as well with, you don't want to label and there's a question, you don't want to label MST, you don't want to label TBI, traumatic brain injury. You want to figure out what the veteran is dealing with, and the symptoms, and then help to treat them in the best way for them, correct?
Yeah, I don't think you want to over generalize disorders on communities. You don't want to say all returning veterans are, messed up with PTSD. People do that. No, that's not the case. But if the evidence is there for certain things or problems, you may want to tell them, like, this looks like, PTSD, but this is how we're going to treat it. Or in some cases, we may meet veterans that exhibit problems from military service, but don't meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. That then you may say where they think they have PTSD, right? And they're labeling it PTSD, where really it's maybe anxiety or depression. So labels are beneficial in identifying from a clinical perspective. And I think from a patient perspective or client perspective of, hey, this is what you've described, and this is what I see as the main issues. And this is how you got here to this label, basically, and how it's impacting you. And this is how we're going to work on addressing the problems associated with your anxiety, your depression, your PTSD.
Excellent point. And Ryan, Eric, whenever you transitioned back into civilian life, did you visit a vet center? Did you feel like you needed to have sort of a readjustment time or talk with another veteran to sort of help with that transition?
I drove by my vet center all the time, and I thought it was a place you took your dog. I thought it was actually a veterinarian clinic. So I drove by it. I drove by it for years and thought it was a veterinarian clinic. And I had no idea what the vet center was until they called asking for an interview with me.
Yeah, similar. I got my behavioral health counseling at a VA hospital, mostly. But yeah, and I didn't know that much about vet centers until I met Eric when I was working at a local university, and he stopped by a few times to tell me about it, and ended up referring a few students over there for services if they needed it. And so that's how I really found out about it. Yeah, it wasn't something that was brought up a lot in the transition out of service or when you come home from a war zone. But to be honest, in a lot of those transition type classes, like, so much information is thrown at the service member in such a short amount of time, it's hard to retain most of it. The military's made some changes to that process, but for the most part, like, it's, hey, you need to be told all of these things in the next 48 hours and then see you later. And you're just trying to get your checklist marked, that you attended this class or got this briefing. And so it's like a race, it's a game to get your transition checklist signed off on. What's the most creative way to cut in line? My personal favorite was when I was a new NCO, was telling a bunch of people in the front of the line that they had a detail they had to report to, and then me and my other friends all got in the front of the line. And then but that's not nice to do. Don't do that.
You get kicked out of Kennywood for that.
Yeah.
One last
order
question.
of the Blue Falcon right there, Ryan.
That's right. But they were my soldiers, right? Like, I was, it was just
that makes it even worse.
I think you're right. One last question about the vet center is where does the vet center go from here? It's grown, it's expanded, it's added mobile. Where do you think the vet center goes in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's going to be an expansion of eligibility for services. I think that we have such an infrastructure already in place, and right now, like we've mentioned, we see war zone veterans, we see bereavement cases, we see survivors of military sexual trauma, and we see their families. I think what we're seeing is a larger need for mental health services in the services. With the rising suicide rate, with other traumas that are being recognized as service members are going through. I think that we have an infrastructure in place already to be able to start seeing those people, even if they're not war zone veterans. So that's my personal opinion where I think it might go. But
I think what the last year has taught us is the opportunity to reach more veterans in different ways. Virtually, it's made us have to, we were kind of more stereotypical, like people come in and sit down. And obviously the last year has changed things for a lot of businesses and organizations. So I would hope that we, continue down that path of approaching how we service our veterans differently and uniquely and increasing that eligibility. So we kind of have a wider blanket of how we support.
Awesome.
I would say we keep seeing more people come in with issues related to military sexual trauma. I think we're kind of in a steady plateau now of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans needing service based on their age and demographics and where they're at in life now. They've kind of managed to get over that hump and figure it out. It'll be interesting. I think I said yesterday, when our generation retires, I think vet centers and VA may see an increase in needs of services. We're still getting folks in. It's just things have kind of, I think, mellowed out with less people in Afghanistan and Iraq and more years from the most dangerous times and troop buildups overseas.
Lee, I know you have to take off here. I want to thank you for coming onto the Scuttlebutt, and I would love to have you back for future discussions and future topics. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean. I really appreciate the time, and I always enjoy working with Eric and Ryan. And again, really, thank you very much.
Of course, and we will put up information here in the chat on the screen, and also we'll say here that to get in touch with the Vet Center, you can go to www.va.gov/find-locations or call 1-877-WAR-VETS. That's 927-8387. These are the Pittsburgh vet centers, Pittsburgh area vet centers. Like I said, there's 300 in the nation. So if you're looking for a vet center service, that's the best way to contact and look for one close to you. Lee, thanks for joining us. We're going to dive into our Scuttlebutt round now, which I believe, unless both of you have a headline to go for, I found one on Task and Purpose. The names rejected from the Space Force. And I know that I've been promising a Space Force episode for quite a while. We're still working on getting somebody from the Space Force. They are difficult. They are difficult to get in touch with.
Top secret stuff.
Top secret stuff, I'll tell you. But we did see a video, or not a video, an article about the rejected names for the servicemen and women who are going to be in the Space Force. And some of them are pretty interesting. Homo Spacians. I like it. The Orbitons. This is in difference to what? Like the Army soldier, right? Or the Marine, or the Navy seaman, or sailor, or submariner. But this Navanants, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Navanants? Namana.
No idea.
The Rocketeers, the Spartans, which actually I thought was pretty cool. But there is a list of like probably almost 500 names, 400 names that they went through before they landed on one. The Spectres, somebody actually said nothing.
So what are they? What is their title? Does it say Space Cadets?
I think they're the
Guardians.
Guardians. The
Really?
Guardians. And I mean,
That's-
I love me some Guardians of the Galaxy, but they are the Space Force Guardians.
That's ridiculous.
I don't mean to laugh at them, but I mean, this is why Space Force, this is why we want to talk about it on the Scuttlebutt, is that it's difficult for the civilian population to take the Space Force seriously because of headlines like this. Like if we were to call them the Space Force Orbitons, we may not be able to take them seriously, right?
I feel, maybe I'm just getting too old or been in the service too long. I don't know, but maybe this is the way like Army guys felt when the Air Force was first created. Like what is the necessity of this? And now the Air Force is probably one of the most important services. But like I mean, it's comedy ready, right?
It is.
That we have a Space Force.
Yeah.
That's just it's on a tee for jokes, and maybe the Air Force will be super appreciative that maybe they won't be the butt of everyone's jokes anymore.
Maybe, but the Space Force does sit within the Air Force.
It should have been called the Space Corps.
Space Corps.
Marine Corps. It should have been the Space. Should have been called the Space Corps or Corps. In terms of, because it falls under the Air Force still. They basically just took over a command in the Air Force. So, but hey, it is what it is. It is what it is, right?
It's better than the Astroneers, the Star-Lord, the Astrolings. I'm just naming ones off the list. Blazers, the Apogees, the Defenders, Space Cadets, Crewmen, Starfighters. Yeah,
There you go. Starfighters. I mean, that's awesome. I think Space Marines. That's all. I mean, there's a whole subculture of things that you can go into. Like, when are we gonna send our first fighting men into space? When's there gonna be space infantry? Like, can you imagine raking and cleaning the moon with your PT belt on? That's where it's really headed. My recruiter lied to me.
Yes, you could have been a space fighter. But thank you both for joining us for the discussion on the Vet Center. I look forward to having you both back, because we do want to have a conversation about PTSD and PTS and how that differs, and what that stigma is in the country. I think it's good for our audience to understand that a little bit more, and I think both of you would be a great guest to talk about that.
Thanks for having us, Sean. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Now, I know you guys are in the same office. Do you ever just use Morse code on the wall?
We're both. Well, first of all, we're both former infantry grunts. We're not smart enough to know Morse code.
Correct.
We do have very loud voices, so we just yell at each other.
Oh, okay, that works.
Grunting.
All right.
More grunting than anything.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can grunt in Morse code, that might. Well, thanks, guys. And thank you, audience, for coming and joining us for another episode of Scuttlebutt. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And send us an email, connect with us. We bring up a lot of topics and a lot of conversations, so we'd like to continue that with you. Thank you all, and thank you both, and we'll catch you next week. And please hang on after the episode. We have sort of a bonus segment where, after we ended recording, Eric and Ryan and I further discussed the article, Civ Mill Relations Are Local by Mitch Fossum. We are hoping to have him come onto the program and discuss his op-ed. And we bring the conversation full circle. Yeah,
I really like that article you sent. That was interesting. It's a good find.
I was not expecting you guys to be like, I kind of took issue with these parts, which I thought was great. It threw me a bit of a curveball, because I mean, I sort of read it and was like, oh yeah, this makes sense to me. So it's great to hear that side of the argument.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense, but like, is it doable? Like that's the difficult part about it. Like, how do you measure that or engage it? You know, when you talk about like making, you know, SMART goals, right? Like how does that occur? How do you encourage people to do this or have it happen? Like that's, you know, in a perfect world, yeah, that'd be great. But how do we go about doing that?
Well, being a military guy, I'm sure the guy Mitch who wrote the article, he might have a thing or two to say about it. I
hope so. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, and if you're joining us again next week, Ryan, if he's coming on here, if he's coming on Generation 9/11, I think he seems like the type of guy who would be open to discussing this. So I think that if him and I and Todd are able to chat and sort of get a sense of like how he would like to have the conversation, if he would just like to talk about it, or if he would like to enter a discussion about it, that might be a good opportunity for some debate, you know, some civil debate on.
You should get Leon here for making fun of him for being an officer.
I know. Yeah. he might really hopefully he'd have a good sense of humor for that.
Yeah.
I guess something to just kind of think about in the discussion is, to me, it kind of came across as like he wants to obligate, maybe I didn't read it good enough or well enough, you know, communities should be obligated to bring in their veterans, and veterans should be obligated to share with their communities. And I think you might have to say, no, you know, I don't want to do that, or my community shouldn't be forced to do that. I don't think anyone should be forced to do something they don't necessarily want to do. I don't think he was necessarily saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, at least I interpret it maybe incorrectly or correctly as picking up that tone. Some veterans just want to be left alone when they come back.
And that should be respected. Definitely.
Right.
I think it's a great question to bring up to him is, do you feel your opinion is obligating these sides to take action when people may not want that?
Yeah. Did you, it was in the end of one of Sebastian Junger's books. I think it was Tribe, but he talked about like these Veterans Day events and how they should like spread more often. And that was like another way to like raise awareness of like servicemen. And obviously those things already happened, but like, you know, the way he was presenting it was like, this should be the start of a longer conversation and the start of getting engaged in the community. You know, and you should use Veterans Day to share veteran stories, not just honoring veterans, but to like basically do what the Veterans Breakfast Club does, right? Which is like share these stories so that people become aware of what military service is like and what sometimes is the cost of that. And, you know, hopefully it'll lead to more veteran and military engagement in their community. It was pretty interesting. He set up like a website for it where you can like register and get resources and stuff like that. But that was that book was published a few years ago. Last year, I think when I checked the website, it was still active.
And I do want to read his books, War and Tribes. And I saw his two documentaries, Korengal and Restrepo, and really powerful stuff. He was, you know, I think he's a civilian, but he was in the trenches.
I've read his books and I've seen the interview, and I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. I think he's really great.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. That was, for whatever reason, my toilet bowl closing. I don't know if you heard that, but it did it on its own. So now my house is haunted.
It's a cat.
It might be. I don't know what that was.
It's waiting for the straight poop.
I'll leave on
that note.
Gents, thank you.
Right,
thank you,
thanks
Eric.
a lot, John.